All right, so we are going to be going through this week's academic vocabulary. Now, some of these are going to be words that we may understood or we practiced in other contexts. But what I want to learn today and teach today is how to find a simpler way to define these things other than just the dictionary definition. So the other two, the first two I felt like we've really talked about these. Evident, which by the way, the dictionary actually just says simply to easily see or understand. So I don't feel like there's much more of an easier way to say that, except it's quite evident itself. Culture, how would you define culture, Jonah? Okay. All right, so culture we talked about in social studies is kind of the context of a way of life concerning their religion, customs, language, dress. Can also be geographical as demographics. So Missoula is different from here because it's lower in elevation. It's predominantly white. Here it's predominantly native. It's kind of hipster. Here it's a little bit more not. Man buns are not a thing around here, right? Right. And so it's a way of life, and every region, local, or nation has its own culture. So this one was a little bit more complex, but we can simply say it's a way of life. So these ones we can kind of see in concrete terms, or things that we could really discuss in its context. However, these three things aren't really concrete. We can't touch interpretation. We can't touch to assume or touch and commission. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take a dictionary definition, which is a lot more complex, and bring it into a definition that we can. Now, there are three things that we want to think about when we go into a dictionary definition, into a what we call student-friendly, or something you would use, is you want to look for words that are repeated. And if it's a noun, who? If it's an action, what is it doing? Okay? An adjective, what is it describing? Okay? Okay. Kind of a who, what, and if there's a where is it describing? Okay? But these three words are going to be, they're actually all verbs or action words. So, you got all these parts down? Okay. All right, so for interpret, the dictionary definition is to explain oneself, and we don't have to write down the word for this, okay? So don't take notes yet. To explain to oneself, to explain the meaning, or to explain the significance of. Okay, so through this process, what we want to do is we want to look for the repeating stuff. So the words that repeat is explain. and then explanation was another one. So to explain, that's the key one. But what is it explaining? And so I want to look at those things. And so what is it explaining? It explains to oneself, but what I want to know what is it explaining, right? Because verbs we want to know what about. And so it says the meaning of something or significance. Do you like meaning or significance as a definition word? Which would be easier for you to understand?
Significance.
Significance. You like? Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make this into to explain the significance of something. Significance of something. Okay? So that is what I'll have you take notes on as the definition. To explain the significance of something. So interpret. Do you believe that people can interpret or explain the significance of dreams? So can we, and then also, based on his facial expressions, I can interpret or explain the significance of what he might be feeling. What it wouldn't be is such as I could not interpret the Chinese man's words because I could not explain the significance or understand what he was saying. Okay? Good. Okay. Now to assume. Assume is something I grew up hearing a lot. You assume too much. You assume, but it's still an abstract word. So, the dictionary definition is to take for granted. Again, this is the dictionary word, so we're not going to take this part down. Okay, to take for granted. Or to suppose. Now, looking at this, in the context that I grew up with, it was really hard to keep it together the same way, because the way I grew up with it is you're guessing about something. So, to suppose actually means to guess. When you're like, hey, do you like my dress? Oh, well, I suppose, I guess. So I'm going to put guess as the word. So what does this do? It's to guess something. All right? So to guess about something. Now, in the context that it's usually used, and this is something that when you are using your vocabulary, you find what context it works in. And it's specifically to guess about something when you don't have all the proof about something. Okay, so for example, Jimmy assumed or guessed that David broke his lamp after he saw David running down the stairs. Jimmy never saw him break the lamp, but because he ran out of the stairs and saw the broken thing, he thought it was David. Okay, this one actually is a live story, a real story. I assumed my dad didn't wash his hands after he went to the bathroom. And the reason was because I knew somebody went to the bathroom, and it wasn't my mom, so it was either my dad or my brother. But it looked like my brother. And my brother at that time didn't wash his hands very often after the bathroom. And I never heard the water. So I assumed it was my dad. It didn't come out very well. My dad got on me for that. He goes, you assumed it was me when you thought it was your brother. He got really upset about that. So I assumed because I guessed about something, but I didn't have all the proof. Now, a non-example of assumption is there's no need to assume that Miss Scarlett killed the butler after she admitted she shot him. Okay, if we have the proof, if we have the evidence, So if it's easily see or understand, there's no need to assume, so to speak. That's a connection. Also, it's able to interpret something if it's evident. So, the last one is quite the busy one, or it has a very lengthy dictionary definition. So it's commission. And it says, as the definition, the authority of granting power or the authority to carry out a task or duty. Okay, so first things first, repeated word. So I am going to look for the repeated word in this, and the repeated word I'm seeing is authority. So I'm going to circle that. So there's going to be something about authority in this definition. But what about authority? Now that we kind of have the, but commission is a verb, to commission something, right? So what is it doing? Well, it grants power, or it carries out something, and specifically a task. I like task better than duty. Too many people laugh at the last one. So, the authority of granting power to carry out a task. To grant power to carry out a task. And again, I didn't have enough room, but grant power and give authority. Okay. So, for example, the military is commissioned by the president to carry out duties, especially in times of war. They're given an authority to carry out a task. And they're given that power, and they're also given that authority. It's a very co-op thing. Same thing in the Christian tradition, that the Great Commission that is spoken of in Matthew, Christians are to carry out the Great Commission. And what that means is that, according to them, they believe that they were granted the authority and power to carry out what God has told them to do. Now, commission, what it isn't, is if a vehicle is out of commission, it can no longer be able to do what it was meant to do. So this is how you want to look up definitions in dictionaries. There's other ways to find definitions, but I really want to take it from, if somebody gives a huge definition, how do we break it down simply for us? And so the next thing we will do tomorrow is to start working on sentences. All right.